There we go. So yeah, you can see it on slide here. Maybe there's more of a focus in flat glass manufacturing and fabrication compared to what is happening here. Now, today I'm asked to talk about recycling and what's happening, what we're doing in Europe in relation to that. Second try, and it works. And we'll make it start with a short video introduction. Let's see if that works again. Techniques is not with me, but please bear with me, or at least. Yes, this is supposed to be a small video, but let's see if that works.
Waste glass is a resource. It is endlessly recyclable. Glass recycling is good for the environment, the climate, and the economy. Using recycled glass reduces the need for raw materials and energy and CO2 emissions from manufacturing. Yet, in Europe, building glass is almost never recycled. On the journey towards carbon neutrality, it's time to stop wasting such an important resource. Go circular and save CO2.
There are several ways of doing this presentation. The easiest one for me is I just stop here and enjoy lunch with all of you and respond to your questions because it was all summarized here. Now I think Camilla expects a bit more from me, so I'll go on. Maybe we'll dig into the details, starting with some of the statements that are made in the video. Probably you're familiar with some of these figures. If that's the case, apologies for repeating them. What do we mean when we say that by increasing recycling, we save energy? It's about saving energy in the glass melting process. And indeed, a 10% increase in cullet allows us to save between 2 to 3% energy. And you could say 2 to 3% is not significant. Of course, many of you know what a float manufacturing plant looks like. It's quite an important saving. And subsequently, a ton of cullet will help you save virgin raw materials, 1.2 tons, and will also help you save CO2 emissions. Again, from your float plant, an average 310 tons of CO2, that's what we calculated on average at European level, both because you're saving energy, so you're not emitting CO2 linked to that energy use, but also because you are limiting the release of carbonates from your initial raw materials, since you're using slightly less raw materials. Now, this is only focusing on the manufacturing, but if you're actually looking at the CO2 that are saved upstream, because you're not quarrying or mining some of those raw materials, you're not transporting them, and so on, then you are actually achieving much higher CO2 savings. So indeed, and that will be on the next slide. Bit tricky. So it's about saving resources, and I gave you some figures about that, but it's not only about saving resources. We have to be looking at recycling also because of the important political pressure we are facing in Europe to deliver greater sustainability and to move towards climate neutrality. But sustainability, climate neutrality basically means that we need to demonstrate our products are future-proof. We're doing environmental product declarations, so as you do, and being able to show a higher recycled content is an important item in the equation. So there is actually a strong industry demand for enhanced recycling in Europe. Now, when we talk about recycling, we can talk about plenty of different things. The way I use the word when I talk about recycling is the cullet going back into a glass manufacturing process. All the rest is a form of downcycling in my mouth. That's what I mean when I'm speaking to you today. So we have that resource, and it can help save plenty of other resources in terms of raw material, energy, CO2. So of course, we're not the only ones interested in using this. We're talking about soda lime silicate flat glass. And in fact, this glass can be used in any glass melting process. It can be used to be producing bottles. It can be used to produce glass wool or glass fibers and other glass products. But the same is not true. So your flat glass cullet, the day it's being used to make a bottle, is lost forever for the flat glass industry. And we cannot reuse glass coming from old bottle banks, if you like. And that, of course, has to do with the quality requirements. You all know that. We want the perfect optic for our products. But that means ultimately that we are competing with many other sectors to get our hand on this resource. Now, the reality is, it is much easier to recycle flat glass in other glass sectors than in the flat glass industry, precisely for the quality specifications and high quality specifications we've got. So it could be easy to say, well, so long it's recycled somewhere, I'm fine. And I don't have to worry about it. But that is not the ambition we have in Europe. In Europe, we want to be talking about true closed loop recycling, flat glass coming back to flat glass. That is our aim, because these energy savings we talked about earlier, these CO2 savings we talked about earlier, we want to benefit from those for our sector. We don't want other sectors to steal our resource, if you like. So the key issue is, how do we maximize return to the float plant? And of course, the key issue is how we collect, sort, and treat the glass to achieve the highest quality levels we need. Okay, we have a great ambition. So where are we now in Europe? Because that's all great and nice, but then where are we as we speak? As we speak, according to the latest data we've collected, on average in Europe, your flat glass batch is composed of 26% of cullet. 5 years ago, we were at 20%. Just to show you how things are progressing quickly in the industry in Europe. Now, this is an average. There are float plants in Europe running with 40, sometimes 50% of cullet in the batch already. That means, of course, others are much lower because you do not necessarily have access to that cullet. Anyway, 26% of cullet in your batch, and you where are they coming from? There are three origins for your cullet in your glass waste. One is, of course, what we call the internal cullet, all the offcuts within the float plant itself. Second source will be what we call pre-consumer cullet, and that usually will be the offcuts in fabrication, in the downstream process, but before your product reaches the final consumer. And then the third source is the end-of-life product. So your old window that's been dismantled, or your old car windshield, and so on and so forth. Now, if we look at those three streams, then we were able to quantify, where is the cullet we're using coming from? And we have that overall picture, which is that most of the cullet we're using is, of course, internal. That's the easiest one. But we are increasingly using pre-consumer cullet, on average 0.25%, 25%, and still very little end-of-life cullet. Now, what you see to the left are the quantities we estimate of cullet that are available in Europe every year, 5 million tons. And those are not 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but you can see it's relatively split. So this is where we are, and that means we are fully already reusing our internal cullet. And in terms of pre-consumer cullet, we are already capturing around 70% of it. But okay, where do we go from here? How do we continue going up? How do we continue capturing more cullet? I'm not going to talk about the internal cullet. That's the easy, it's all being taken care of. So I'm going to start with the second stream, which is that of pre-consumer cullet. What you see to the left are the estimates of how this is being already collected and recycled in Europe. So as I said, a big chunk of it is already going back to flat glass. But some others are, some other quantities are going to other glass sectors, and some of it is indeed recovered, disposed, or landfilled. But this is relatively little. How did the industry increase from 20 to 26% over 5 years? It's basically by working with the fabricators and the processors to make sure that all the offcuts are separated in special bins and that they are collected regularly directly by the floor glass manufacturers themselves. The truck comes, delivers the glass, goes back with the cullet. That's the easiest way. Can be sometimes a bit more complicated, but some companies have organized it this way. So it's a relatively straightforward route, very clean cullet, usually. So very easy to reinsert in your floor glass blend. But as you can see, we can always improve, but we're not going to gain huge quantities in this stream. The way for European manufacturers to progress and access more cullet is to focus on what's happening in terms of end-of-life building glass. The 1.5 million tons of end-of-life building glass produced in Europe annually. Well, according to different research and data, less than 5% of that is already recycled in Europe. Most of it, as I said, is going to landfill, or it's used as aggregates to do roads. So once you know that picture, you're like, okay, what can we do? We did work with a consultant to look at the situation across several European countries and crunch the numbers and see, what is it that makes sense or doesn't make sense in relation to that. Clearly, the environmental benefits are there. We know them. I won't repeat them. The fundamental issue is it cost effective to recycle this glass? And admittedly, the finding of the study 5 years ago was not yet, but very soon it will become. And the reality of today is it has become profitable to do the extra work needed to collect this glass, at least in Europe, for several reasons, starting with much higher energy prices than here and much higher carbon costs than here. So these two elements are actually making the recycling balance profitable in Europe. Maybe it's not the case here. I can't comment on that. Now, of course, there is some work to do. The focus so far has been placed on building renovation rather than demolition, and particularly in the residential sector, because this is a priori the segment where it is easier to collect the glass and adequately source it at source, at the origin. That is basically what is shown here. This is what needs to happen. To avoid the contamination down the road that will render the glass treatment particularly costly and difficult, you need adequate collection and sorting. So if we're looking about residential replacements, you have that window installer that comes to the house and puts the new window and he takes back the old one. Well, if he's doing that and he's actually at the end or at his workshop then separating the glass from the rest of the frame, then you're on pretty good solid ground for the rest of the chain. But then indeed you will need specific container, you will need to have a logistics in place for the transportation of this glass. You will still need some treatment that needs to be cost effective as well, so that it can end up going back in a float glass plant at a profitable cost. The red cross here are not meant to say that this is not happening or that we do not have the technology for these particular steps. It just means that we still need to make it more affordable and more cost effective. And I won't go into the details because I'm sure that's more the next speaker's item, but just to say that in the flat glass sector in Europe, all companies are working with recyclers or directly themselves on plenty of projects to try and tackle all these elements. On the logistics, those containers, on the type of trucks and how do you optimize the transport of the cullet? Is it by rail? There are also trials being done there. In the glass treatment at the end of the day, you could say, is the job of specific companies that do that. Yes, well, admittedly, but in Europe, you also have some manufacturers like Saint-Gobain that are investing in their own glass treatment facility on their float line to make sure that they get the exact specs they want for reintroduction in the furnace. But also, you know, the machinery, and then there are also a lot of projects on how you work for big buildings, high-rise buildings in cities where the environment is more confined. And there are several case studies that have been done between manufacturers, Hoop and others. So the industry is really working hard on all of this in Europe, and that will be basically my last slide, to say that the reason why the industry is working hard on it is also because it is considered as absolutely essential for the future of our industry. It's our sustainability credential, and it is an essential route to decarbonize our own manufacturing process. So that's why it's a key element of our Glass for Europe vision. And I have a few copies here, by the way, if some of you are interested in it. It's definitely a priority work stream for us and my team in Brussels. We are working on the technical obstacles with the companies, but we're also working on the legislative regulatory aspects and how we can create a framework that is more conducive to glass recycling in Europe. My final word will be about competition, because we all know it. Competition is a great driver of innovation, is a great driver of action. And now we have in Europe flat glass manufacturers competing to access that resource. So I'm very confident things will happen very fast. Thank you.